أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في الدين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. Yesterday, the International Court of Justice began hearings against Israel for the genocide in Gaza. And this case, brought by South Africa, is backed by the 57 countries of the OIC and the 22 countries of the Arab League, and in fact, the entirety of the Global South. You know, many people wondered how this case would go, whether or not the ICJ would rule against Israel or not. Rule that, yes, in fact, genocide is being actively committed against the people of Gaza. You know, it's understood that the ICJ is a political institution, and its rulings are heavily political and subject to political pressure. So people have wondered, and reasonably so, what are the chances that they will actually rule against Israel, while Israel has always been fully backed by the Western powers, and the ICJ has become regarded as a tool of the Western powers, particularly of the United States. Well, you didn't have to wait for very long to see which way the court was likely to go. First of all, the evidence that's being presented by South Africa is absolutely irrefutable and damning. Their case is supremely well evidenced and meticulously detailed, and literally cites the genocidal words of Israeli officials themselves, including Netanyahu himself, and directly connects those words with the actions of the Israeli military in Gaza. So it's absolutely a devastating case, and it's impossible, frankly, to argue against it. Certainly it's impossible to argue against it with any degree of seriousness or with any comparable standard of evidence and reason as is being presented by the prosecution. Just from the first day of testimony, Israel and the United States were completely and immaculately defeated. And if you had any doubt that they realized this, that Israel and the United States realized this, then there's nothing that could have proved it more than what the U.S. did later that day, that evening, in fact, that same evening. They attacked Yemen. They attacked Yemen because they knew that they were going to lose in the International Court of Justice. This is a very desperate, very pathetic form of doubling down. Imagine, their response to the irrefutable proof of genocide in Gaza is to escalate and to expand the violence, to defend the genocide. They cannot defend the genocide in court, so they decided to compound the brutality by spreading it. They defend carnage by means of carnage. That's the American way. They've lost the support of the world because they lost the awe of the world. They lost the respect of the world. And they lost the fear of the world. They're backed into a corner in the world court, and they're being exposed. And they're being ensnared by the very system that they created. The system that they created to protect their impunity and to prosecute their opponents. The mechanisms of law that they constructed to oppress and to persecute and to immunize themselves is now being turned against them. So they resort to what they always resorted to. They resort to what they created that whole system to enable them to do, which is savage, primitive, brute force and violence. The layers are being peeled away. The veneer is being stripped off. You know, America has been king of the hill for all these years, and they're being pulled down that hill. And not only that, the hill itself is pulling them down, and all they can do is lash out. I'm telling you, what we're seeing right now is a victory. Their vicious, barbaric instincts are only accelerating their downfall. By attacking Yemen, they're just showing the world, and showing the world court, that yes, it is genocide in Gaza, and it is genocide in Gaza because we think our capacity for violence makes us superior, makes us supreme, and our capacity for violence entitles us to be violent. And so what? What are you going to do about it, world? Because what were the Houthis doing except trying to stop the genocide? They weren't doing anything but enforce a blockade against a criminal regime, a terrorist regime, a genocidal regime. So how are you going to punish them for that? Except that you are criminal and terrorist and genocidal yourself. Well, look, nobody is with them. I mean, their coalition against Yemen fell apart weeks ago, and no one joined them in their airstrikes except the UK. The whole world has left them. Even Western countries don't want any part of this. They're just making it worse on themselves. We are literally witnessing an American meltdown. And I believe, very importantly, that this is also because the owners and controllers of global financialized capital are abandoning them. America hollowed itself out for decades. They transferred power and authority to the private sector. And now they're being left empty. And there's nothing left but those barbaric instincts and violent tendencies. And they're being isolated. And their own instincts, their own tendencies, are just isolating them further. They think that they can act like they used to act, do what they used to do. But you see, this was only ever possible in the past because the world was willing to capitulate. It was only ever possible because the world acquiesced. And the world only ever capitulated and only ever acquiesced because they didn't have any other options. That isn't the case anymore. And the case in the international court demonstrates that. While this case could never have been made 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago. I mean, the case never would have been accepted. It never would have been heard by the court. The case for genocide certainly could have been argued for 75 years. In fact, it could have been argued for a century, but the court would never have allowed it. The court would have never heard it before now. The very fact that this case is being heard and was initiated by BRICS, supported by the OIC, supported by the Arab League and the whole global South, demonstrates that America's time is up. Let me tell you how their barbaric instincts are being used against them. They are attacking Yemen because how is Yemen going to retaliate? The Houthis are not going to do anything but retaliate against who they can retaliate against, which is going to be American and British commercial vessels, Western vessels in the Red Sea. They were only targeting Israeli ships, but now, very likely, they will consider any Western vessel as a legitimate target. Now, if the Houthis hit American or British vessels, the Americans think that will give them an opportunity to escalate the conflict to where they can shift the focus of their violence against Iran. Because, all they ever do is look for ways to escalate and expand war and bloodshed. That's their barbaric instinct. But turning the Red Sea into an open conflict zone, turning it into a war zone, will completely end Western commercial presence in the Red Sea. Their own actions are driving them out of the region. And as I've said before, no one who matters wants a war with Iran. No one wants the Middle East to be set on fire. And no one who matters is going to go along with this. America's doing nothing now but reminisce. Attacking Yemen is a kind of a fit of nostalgia for the old days when this kind of flex would impress anyone. But now it's just going to emphasize to the whole world that America is a dangerous liability. And there's no benefit in trying to appease or placate them. They're taking one wrong action after another. It's like watching Joe Biden try to go up a flight of stairs or ride a bicycle. They can't do anything right, and they can't read the room. The Middle East, the region, and in fact, international relations generally, by and large, because of BRICS, is returning to being an organized, cordial, intelligent conversation between nations. And then America comes barging in, belching and shouting obscenities. The world's done with that. Nobody's impressed. So today, Friday, in the ICJ, Israel had the audacity to try to defend themselves against the charge of genocide by spewing the same debunked, hollow talking points that they always do. Because they've never had to actually defend themselves. And even now, their real defense is being carried out by the US and UK airstrikes in Yemen. They're insulting the intelligence of the court. They're insulting the intelligence of the whole planet. But again, that's because the power of the United States used to be able to force the whole planet to play dumb. Israel was like that horrible, untalented sidekick of the neighborhood mafioso who everyone had to pretend was charming and brilliant. But again, those days are over. And those days being over is explicitly clear both by the fact that the ICJ hearings are taking place and by the fact that the US and the UK are attacking Yemen to try to change the narrative and try to distract from having the genocide in Gaza indicted. Because like I've said before, the genocide in Gaza is nothing but an American genocide. Israel is nothing but a Western colonialist project, a violent American intrusion into the region. Zionism is just a rebranding of Western imperialism, and that's why it's being enforced and defended by attacking Yemen, because it's all about domination and control of the whole region. The Zionists are just the Jewish regiment of the imperialist army, nothing more. But everybody knows that this isn't going to work in the 21st century. Everybody knows, except for the neocons in Washington and the delusional fanatics in Tel Aviv. Everyone knows that this is not what the future looks like. Global business knows that this is not what the future looks like. And I don't think that they're going to let the United States keep splattering their violent stupidity across the region. No, the center of gravity is moving from the West to the global South, and it's moving from the uncivilized world to the civilized world. And there's a lot more money to be made by harmonious, cooperative, integrated global relations than by the old model of domination and subjugation and bloodshed. You see, the war economy of the United States, the so-called military-industrial complex, as the main management strategy and the driver of the domestic economy, that being allowed was dependent on the fact that the domestic economy of the United States, domestic prosperity in the United States, was important to the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. Back in the day, when companies and the financial elites were bound by national borders and subordinate to the state. That's not the case anymore. So that system, that war-driven economic model, has become a liability. But American politicians are notoriously slow on the uptake. Politicians in Washington are like a cartoon character who runs off a cliff and just floats there suspended for a second, realizing too late that there's no earth beneath his feet. And then they'll go plummeting down into oblivion. They've run out of road. They just don't know it yet. But meanwhile, the rest of the planet is already moving at pace down a highway that nobody in Washington ever even realized had been built. Oh yes, this is a victory. And Muslims need to make tasbih, they need to make tawbah, they need to make istighfar like never before, because we are living through the liberation of our lands, the liberation of our people. And we need to be glad and we need to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.